Another thing we've introduced is kind of our title sponsors, and eShopWorld, or ESW, as they've rebranded, is one of them. So feel free to grab a bag or two if you've got a colleague that you'd like to take a gift bag to. Feel free; these are for you guys. And so, without further ado, I want to thank the eShopWorld folks. And Patrick, why don't you say hello, and Valerie as well? And I'm going to leave the stage for you guys. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, all, and it's just great to be here in person for a change. It was long in the coming, but thrilled to have many of you in the attendance this morning for this exchange with Valerie de Charette from AEO, American Eagle Outfitters, one of the most iconic American global brands. My name is Patrick Bousquet-Chavanne. There's a bit of Frenchness behind that. I'm the president and CEO of eShopWorld, or ESW, recently rebranded, as you just heard, in the Americas. My background is about 30 plus years, I'll leave it at that, in global retail and global branding, having worked for multiple CPG companies and taking brands globally. And thrilled to be here at this point in time. Joined ESW about a year ago, and since March have taken the helm for the Americas expansion of our product and platform here in the US. And thrilled to be here with you on stage this morning.
Awesome, thank you. Thanks for inviting me. Valerie de Charette, I'm with American Eagle Outfitters. I lead their international e-commerce team. I've been in retail my entire career, also 20 plus years. Across different channels, everything from grocery to fashion, both luxury as well as more mass, and have worked across many different countries and regions. I lived for a little bit in China as well as in Singapore, and have been with American Eagle since January. So have been working with eShopWorld since then. Localized e-commerce is a bit new for American Eagle. We've been present digitally in many countries for a long time, but only since early in the pandemic have we had multiple localized sites. So a lot of them are through eShopWorld.
And it's great to have you and to partner with you. Maybe as a starting point, I think it would be great to talk about the moment in time in retail. We just went through 18 months of pretty profound transformation and changes in the global retail. So what you find at this moment in time is the pivotal excitement in the industry. And there's a lot of energy in the room this morning, obviously. So how would you capture the moment in time that we are going through?
Oh my gosh. You kind of just want to take a break. It's been such an insane year and a half, 2 years, but I think actually now is when you really need to dig in and get good, right? I think a lot of companies are similar to us, where either you focused a lot more, or maybe you even just launched e-com in certain countries during the pandemic. And so, last year, it didn't kind of matter what you did, it went well because you were starting from zero. And so I think now is when the going gets a little tougher, and now is when we have to be a little bit more sophisticated and thoughtful, and take a lot of the learnings from the more mature countries, or the countries where your business is more mature, and make those work, tweak those for those different countries, for those different customers, and get to the next level, right? You can't just throw something online and because the stores are closed, they'll come to you. Now you have to really make it worth their time and worth their experience.
I think when we look at the impact on global retail, and obviously we'll talk a lot about D2C and cross-border in a moment, but I think there's a bit of a trifecta effect impacting the industry globally, and kind of the merging of the channels of consumptions as well, and the channels of distribution. Number one, I think, is the impact of technology, generally speaking, on retail. Whether it's physical or online retail, the morphing of the two combined, and with the impact of technology. Yeah. Second, and I think in about a few months from now, we'll be celebrating the US first $1 trillion in basically e-commerce business. I mean, that's an exceptional moment in time. And the third one is the generational shift that we see happening with Gen Z and millennials. So can you talk a little bit about, obviously AEO, very much driven by what's happening in terms of millennials and Gen Z generation. It's always good to start with the consumers. What's your perspective on their new consumer behaviors as they look at both channels, D2C, online, and physical stores?
Yikes. That is a crazy question. I think I think one of the things, and it's funny that you start with technology. Obviously, we're in digital, so I think everybody expects us to be very technology focused and innovation focused, and that is obviously very important. But I think we also need to be a little careful sometimes and pivot to what the customer is actually using as opposed to the fancy technology that we may have thought was interesting. So as an example, I feel like 10 years ago, what everybody was really interested about in retail was putting all these screens in stores and making this connected store. But that was before everybody had a screen in their hand. And now it's really more about meeting the customer where they are, which is on their phone, in their palm. As we all have them stuck to us. I feel like now with the mask, it's like mask plus phone. Like can't do anything without these two things. But so I think a lot of meeting the customer where they are is being flexible about what we thought was cool, what we thought was the next thing, but actually you have to keep listening because it actually changes that frequently. I mean, the 10-year span's probably not even the accurate time that I should be using. It's really more of a 6 months, 8 months, 3 months even. Some of the examples that Jose gave of some of these marketplaces that didn't even exist 3 years ago, and now they're up there on your list of top 3 in this country. We just need to be that agile and that nimble, and that I think this generation is really teaching us that.
And clearly the advance of social channels, as we've seen in China, but way beyond China, now obviously is consumer-led.
Yeah.
Yes, there's a technology behind, but the consumers are kind of leading. So if we look at direct-to-consumer channels today, why is it so pivotal to be present? And I mean, Jose was talking about kind of the bifurcation of consumers now, and brands, most importantly, slightly away from marketplaces into owning their own DTC channel. So why was it important for AEO, for you to kind of really invest in that channel and accelerate your development in direct to consumers?
Yeah, I mean, everybody talks about direct to consumer and how it's important to own your customer and own that relationship and own that data, right? And that is very important, and that goes without saying, and that's probably the number one reason. But I think also important, American Eagle has a very strong brand. American Eagle and Aerie are both very strong brands that have a very deep connection with customers, that customers feel very deeply about, and being able to tell your story exactly the way you want, not being limited to certain parameters, that is also a very important piece of DTC. And don't get me wrong, marketplaces, I think, they have a time, they have a place. They can be a very useful way to enter a market, to test a market. They can be a good way to increase brand awareness during a time when you may not have a lot of money to invest. But ultimately, I think we all want to get, if you're a brand, if you're a real brand that tries to connect directly with your consumers, you want to get to DTC, right? And ultimately, you want that to be your main channel. You want to bring people over from marketplaces to your DTC channels, whether they're physical or digital. So again, there's a time and a place, but DTC, if you're a strong brand, that's where you want to focus.
I mean, many of the brands that we are working with are really outlining a strategy that looks at complementarities.
Yeah.
So it's not about one versus the other. It's avoiding what I would call proliferation of distribution channels that may not complement, but kind of cannibalize each other. So
what have you seen work the best?
I think that you have, in some regions, if I take Asia, for example, marketplace that just to name one, Zalora, who is 50 million visitors per month. And if you're in the fashion space, your brand has a space, has quality, and it works in adjacency to your own DTC channel. So I think it's a complementarity versus one replacing the other. And I think that the golden triangle is your own physical distribution channel, a solid marketplace that complements, and you can leverage the traffic that this digital mall brings to your brand as well, but with limited expression of the brand, and then you obviously your own DTC channel where you can fully express the brand. To your point, you own first-party data or zero-party data. Consumers are coming in, and you build your brand. And over the long term, it's clearly, as Jose was mentioning, a more profitable way of also building brand equity. So for us, it's more a question of complementarity and adjacencies, as long as you can somehow connect the inventory pools.
Right.
Because the last thing you want to know is multiple inventory at the regional or the country level. So, and that's a dynamic that we're facing with a lot of our customers and clients today.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do think it's also, especially when you're new to a market and maybe your infrastructure isn't where you need it to be. I think the other thing to keep in mind is also to make sure that the experience that you're offering them on your DTC channel is comparable. Obviously not going to be exactly the same. In some ways it should be better. Maybe in some ways you're not going to hit this kind of SLAs that they're hitting, but you want it to at least be comparable so that you're not showing up in a poor light.
So take us through your thought process as you were looking at different options for you to go DTC, and a lot of work has happened in the Asia-Pacific region, which is an important strategic area for AEO. Take us back, and if you can share with the audience, what was the process and the reasons why you decided to go the route that you went?
I mean, the first thing, American Eagle has a long and pretty successful history with expanding internationally through license partners. These are very, very close partnerships. And I think APAC specifically, historically we had some partnerships, but this was an opportunity for us to move towards more of an owned and operated model in a region that we knew was going to be key to future growth and key to success ultimately. So it was important for us to shift to an owned and operated model for both online and offline. And so with Hong Kong as our base, given that we had already an owned and operated, quite successful physical presence, that's when it's from there that we started trying to figure out how do we use this base as a jumping off point for growth. And I think when you're in a big company, and I've been in many big companies that are two primarily huge companies that are U.S. based. When you're the international division, regardless of how big you might be compared to other external companies, for a long time, you're still the smaller portion of this large company, right? And so it can take a long time to prove the worth of the investment in that country or in that international region. It can take a while to start to show up on the financial statement when you're compared to this huge behemoth. I mean, I worked at Walmart and I worked at Sam's Club. Even Sam's Club is a $50 billion company. We barely showed up next to Walmart, and we were last in line for every resource. So, it kind of doesn't matter like how big or small the international team is, but if you're like a US or, if you're base business is somewhere else, you'll always be sort of like the small upstart challenger division. And so it was important for us to, a couple of things. One was to find a partner who had some expertise in the various countries, because APAC is not one country, right? So we needed somebody who had multiple countries worth of expertise. And then it also was important for us to find, for the key markets that we knew were going to be important for us, to find local talent in those markets or who were from those markets, who would have a closer understanding of those markets and also be able to speak to customers and be on the ground in that language. And then the other important thing was also just not to overthink or overplan it, right? I think one of the things that we were asked in the podcast was, sort of what surprised us. We actually not that much surprised us because we sort of went in assuming we were going to be surprised at every turn, right? So I think being pretty flexible, being, again, I said this before, being agile, being ready to test and learn, not over investing in anything before seeing, what kind of fruit it was going to bring. And then also, I go back to finding a partner, but finding a partner who also was going to be able to be that flexible and make changes along the way and be okay if, 6 months in, we're like, oh, guess what? We're going to open a new DC in this place because it's that important and we want to locally fulfill from there. Fantastic. Like 3 months, let's make it happen.
There's a lot of complexity in transporting brands internationally. There's obviously a financial underpinning. I think you're making the point about, generally speaking, CFOs and boards being quite impatient about the return on investment. Yes, the risk profile going international augments as you're trying to take your business model and your brand proposition to travel across markets. So there's obviously an embedded inherent complexity in taking those brands globally. For AEO, what was the most challenging part of that decision, and why eventually doing it with ESW, and what did you see the benefits of the partnerships as we did it?
Well, I only started in January, so I don't know if I was here for the hardest part of, of the convincing. But I do think that, I think what was lucky for American Eagle is that we actually had an established international business. So not necessarily digital per se, but we had a large international business. And so I think most of the hard work of convincing the company that international was important had been done, at least on the brick and mortar side. I think the company also has a realistic understanding of the growth timing and the growth curve. And I think that is very important, right? You don't want to kind of overestimate how quickly you're gonna see returns and how quickly you're gonna see growth as you open new channels, especially if you're not like really investing. And again, international is not a place. So you really do need to think about how much it's going to take to invest in each of the markets. And remember, depending on which markets you're in, you may not even have synergies in terms of the partners you're working with, right? Like you don't even have synergies in terms of marketing partners or marketing channels. So it really is, it can be a lot of investment to make it work. So you just need to have a company that is realistic in their expectations of when they're going to see returns. So unfortunately, I don't know if I was there for the hardest part of it. But I do think what was important was finding a partner that was both big enough, and I'm going to say the same thing over and over because it's so important, but was both big enough to support a brand that is big and established and has standards that need to be upheld regardless of how startup-y we might be in one market, but that also was flexible because again, like we're learning as we go in some of these countries from a digital perspective, and so we needed that flexibility.
When you're present in so many markets, what is your approach to demand generation, and where does it play? A lot of brands many times say, well, I'm international, I'm shipping goods from the US or from Europe outbound. I'm in 100 markets, and it's all organic, and it's happening. And that is a bit of a myopic view of looking at basically how do you retain consumers, how do you keep them on the brand, and how do you eventually build your brand equity. So what's the role of basically local marketing, demand gen type of investments, and what is your perspective on that?
Yes, so American Eagle is a company, and it has worked for us digitally, internationally, is very focused on real customers, real advocates. Yes, they can be influencers, they can be celebrities sometimes, but they're true advocates for a brand. And that actually has translated across the globe in the way that, me coming in new in January was like, oh, we're just taking our US blueprint, we're using it around the world. It actually has been extremely successful. We have not necessarily used the same influencers internationally. We've found what makes sense to that customer, but we've used a similar focus on smaller, more local, more specific, more real advocates across the social channels that are important in those countries, and that has absolutely proven successful around the globe. Again, I think I downplay, I say we use the US blueprint. We definitely spent time, and when I say we, I mean my amazing marketing team, spent time tailoring that approach by country and picking exactly the right people by country. We have some really interesting people that I would never have thought of in Hong Kong and in Mexico, some of our biggest markets, but that has worked tremendously. And I think it really is, it's a mix of staying true to your brand DNA, which for us is being real, and so finding real people and people that the customers believe when they say that this feels good or looks good or makes them feel confident. So taking that brand DNA, but then finding the right people and how that shows up in the countries, which is very different. We definitely have learned that certain, the things that are selling out from an Aerie perspective in the US may not be at all what's selling in APAC. And so we've definitely had to tweak things both from a product as well as a messaging. But at the core, we've stayed true, and that approach has actually worked for a demand gen perspective.
And that's a big aspect, actually, of going international and going cross-border. Is really the understanding of the consumer, basically, response to your different triggers as a brand. And the fact that when you own your channels internationally, you have those first-party data that you can cultivate, activate, put back to merchandising, to product development, and the wealth of data you're getting, if you can harvest those data and really interpret the data, can really basically give you a much different perspective of those different tribes of consumers in different parts of the world, which is one of the major benefits of controlling your own channel. Yeah. In the last minute here, what gets you excited about what's ahead when we look at e-com in general and where the brand is going and how you're integrating all of that in your forward thinking?
I often say that working international is like a little bit like doing whatever you normally do, but on steroids, because it's like it's the normal e-commerce job, except you do it in so many languages and across so many cultures, and there's a big holiday or shopping event pretty much every week, depending on how many countries you're in. I think what excites me is just that. It's just there's so much going on. There's so much opportunity. I mean, there's also a lot of FOMO, right? Every time I read an article about some retailer that's testing something digitally, I'm like, oh my God, we need to be doing that also, right? There's like so much out there. There's so much that you could be doing. So I'm just excited about how we're gonna make the hard trade-offs of what we can actually test and do. But again, I'm gonna say it again, guys. We stay flexible. We make sure that we're revising the plan every quarter and making sure that we're leaving a little bit of room for some innovation and for some testing and to do something crazy per market and see how it goes. So excited to keep doing it.
Valerie, thank you very much. Definitely an exciting journey ahead.
Thank
you to our audience.
I didn't realize it went so fast.
Yeah, we've got a few minutes for some Q&A, if that's okay. If there's any questions or anything like that, I know we've got some mics and things like that, but while I'm, of course, blinded by the light. But yeah, if there are no questions, that's, do we have someone, Bree? Okay, thanks.
Hi. Yeah. Hi. I just wanted to know from both of your perspectives. I'm Abby. I work in the beauty industry. When you're looking at international expansion, how are you kind of methodically approaching which markets you go into? And what are those kind of key indicators that those markets are kind of ready for your brand? I'm not sure if you guys have experience with that, but I'd love to hear about it.
I mean, obviously, the like standard sort of like consulting or research approach is a good one. Understanding which countries have the more developed, especially if you're talking about digital specific, right? The most developed like digital industry for beauty specifically, since obviously that is an area digitally that has been growing more recently, I would say, in most countries. So just doing that due diligence of whether the market is ready for you. Obviously, like how important is beauty for the customer, especially if you're like color versus skin. But I think also there are other things around just exploring, how people what brands people are searching, how many followers do you have on your U.S. Instagram from those countries. There's just a lot of, I think, little pieces of data that you can find, and then of course you can ask people to go over there and do deeper dives. But I think all of that combined can help. I mean, I think with American Eagle, again, we've had a lot of international exposure, so we had a lot of information by country from our other channels, so unfair head start.
I think similar comments. One of the leading indicators, international visits to your domestic website. You can track it, IP localization, give you a great sense of some organic interest. I find fascinating that searches in the beauty sector from Google during the pandemic have gone basically 10 times high. People were searching for brands and products not available in their domestic market. Therefore, basically the cross-border expansion and explosion over the last 18 months. If you know your brand purpose very well, find adjacencies, brands that have a similar tribe following them. Look at their performance in those local markets. Doesn't mean you're going to do the same, but at least it gives you a leading indicator as well in terms of how some are performing in that area. And there is plenty of search data as well that can be exploited in terms of key terms that may be part of your brand DNA that you want to look at and say, listen, in that country, in that region of the world, it resonates with potential consumers. Let's start putting a stick in the ground. And it doesn't have to be physical retail. Again, to your point, it could be direct to consumers, a leading indicator of where you can start building some demand.
Thanks, Abby. Anyone? Well, maybe a quick follow-up to that. Jose had those great cohorts, the pre and the hopefully post-COVID. Have you seen any market reprioritization, or is it, you guys did a lot of testing and things like that? My sense is maybe not, but it's something we have been kind of trying to get a feel for. Is there a kind of a new world order, if you will, coming out from a cross-border perspective?
I mean, we have definitely seen a market adjacent to the U.S. Tapping into the U.S. brand has physical retail availability. I'm thinking about LATAM countries. I'm thinking about Canada. explosion of cross-border from the US for the larger US brands. US brands going into Europe as their physical stores were basically closing down as well. And I mean, markets like Russia, which was literally very strongly impacted for quite some time, a complex market to deal with, where we saw brands going cross-border as well. So there are multiple pockets of a very resilient now and sustained customer behavior that will go way beyond COVID. But definitely LATAM, I mean, Asia is now literally exploding in this ramp up to the holiday season. So we'll see their weight onto the global e-com scale. But I think that most importantly for me is the resiliency of customer propensity to buy online. It's convenient, they tested it, it's sure, secure, and basically they're part of that discovery journey of discovering new brands that they might not have had in their local territory historically.
All right, anyone else? Okay, one last one. Let's see. Bree is coming. Thank you, Bree.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I'm Juliana from Flow Commerce. I'm also cross-border solution, but I was wondering, what was for Valerie, what drove your decision to, rather than build in-house, to work with a solution? Sort of what were the drivers there? Like, how did you make that decision? Thanks.
Yeah. I mean, I think the timing with COVID, probably the first thing driving us was speed. The second thing driving us was complexity. There's a lot of complexity to having localized sites abroad. Yes, there's checkout. Yes, there's currency and there's shipping, but there's also translations, but there's such a can of worms. There's also regulation, right? There's so much regulatory difference across so many different functions. Speed and complexity, I mean, we probably would still be working through that. And I'm not saying, again, like that's any company, I think, would still be working through that. That is not a commentary on the company that I'm at. So it just made more sense to go with a partner who had the expertise already. I think there's plenty to test and learn without needing to test and learn like the infrastructure.
Again, Patrick, Valerie, thank you. And Patrick and your team, thanks again for all your support. So thank you guys very much.
Thank you. Thank you.